You know that modern frustration where science, philosophy, and religion all just seem like they're endlessly at war with one another? Like you're constantly being forced to pick a side? Well, in today's Explainer, we're going to dive into a framework that completely dissolves that conflict. We are going to map out all of human inquiry as one incredibly unified system. As you'll see, across cultures and history, our absolute greatest intellectual and spiritual developments can actually be traced back to just 6 fundamental questions. The source text we're exploring today puts it perfectly. Rather than viewing philosophy, science, and religion as competing enterprises, this framework reveals them as complementary. And that right there is the core thesis of our explainer. These disciplines aren't fighting over the same territory at all. They are just answering entirely different questions on the exact same map of human existence. They each just have a totally distinct job to do. All right, let's map this out. Today we're going to explore 4 main areas. First, the collective dimension. Second, the objective dimension. Third, the individual dimension. And finally, integrating human understanding. First stop on the map, the collective dimension, which is all about shared human meanings. The very first fundamental question humanity asks is simply, who are we? Because think about it, humans are not solitary creatures. Long before you ever became a self-conscious individual with your own unique thoughts, you were born into a totally pre-existing world. You were born into a specific language, a specific culture, traditions, and really complex relationships. This dimension explores how our identities are completely forged by those collective networks. Now think about concepts like nations, legal systems, or even money. They don't actually exist in the physical world of nature, right? I mean, you can't put the economy under a microscope. These are classic examples of intersubjective reality. A dollar bill is basically just a piece of paper that we collectively hallucinate value onto. Without our shared agreement, it's literally meaningless. So this project is all about that shared world of meaning we create together. Moving on to part 2, the objective dimension, which is essentially the domain of science. This dimension seeks to answer our second great project: what is the world? The scientific revolution completely transformed how we answer this question. Instead of relying on ancient authority or mythology, science demands hard evidence. It assumes that nature has regularities that we can actually discover through careful observation, math, and experimentation. Galileo, Newton, Darwin, Einstein, they were all working within this exact same project.
Here is a great way to think about the distinction. Science asks, how does nature work? But mythology or religion asks, what does nature mean? Science deliberately and rightly remains totally silent on questions of meaning or value. It uses mathematics and experiments to figure out the pure mechanics of the universe. What matter is, how stars evolve, how the brain functions. But when you want to know what it all actually means, well, you have to look elsewhere on the map.
Which brings us to part 3, the individual dimension. This is our inner landscape. In this dimension, things get really fascinating because we actually have 4 distinct questions. The first one is, how do I know? Before we can claim to know anything at all about the world or even ourselves, we have to figure out how we distinguish truth from illusion. Enter epistemology. This is the theory of knowing. It studies evidence, justification, and the actual limits of our reason. Thinkers all the way from Plato and Descartes in the West to Nyaya and Buddhist philosophers in the East have deeply explored what counts as certainty. And the reality is, without epistemology, without these methods to validate what is real, neither science nor philosophy could even get off the ground. So once we establish how we know things, the next question naturally bubbles up: who am I? Before asking what physically exists out there in the universe, we have to look inward at the entity that is actually experiencing that existence, right? Long before we start making any theoretical explanations. The discipline that tackles this is phenomenology. It's the study of lived experience and consciousness exactly as it appears to us on a daily basis. It asks things like, what is it actually like to experience sadness or to see the color red? It's deeply complementary to science. For example, neuroscience studies the brain's physical mechanisms from a third-person perspective, firing synapses and chemicals. But phenomenology? It studies the first-person, lived experience of having a mind, 2 sides of the exact same coin. Next up, in the individual dimension, we stumble into a deeply, instinctively human question: why am I? Because just having knowledge of the physical world doesn't tell you how you ought to live. Human beings naturally seek out meaning and purpose.
Welcome to the realm of existential philosophy. This is where we investigate massive ideas like freedom, responsibility, mortality, and authenticity. It's where thinkers like Kierkegaard, Nietzsche, and Sartre operate, right alongside teachings from the Bhagavad Gita or the Buddha on suffering and duty. The crucial takeaway here is that no microscope, literally no matter how powerful, can tell you why your life matters. Science explains how life evolves, sure, but existential philosophy asks why life matters. That belongs entirely to the human experience.
And finally, we hit the fourth individual question, which is perhaps the deepest metaphysical question of all human inquiry. What am I? This leads us straight into ontology. It's the raw investigation into existence itself. What kinds of things actually exist? What is the fundamental nature of reality, or substance, or just being? While phenomenology looked at the everyday experience of being alive, ontology is the abstract, foundational inquiry into the sheer, mind-bending fact of existence itself. Whether it's Western thinkers like Spinoza or Eastern traditions like Advaita Vedanta analyzing ultimate reality, this is all about the absolute foundation of what is. Actually, people confuse these two all the time, but the difference is brilliant. Who am I? That's phenomenology. It's your lived identity, your everyday subjective experience of being you. But what am I? That's ontology. It's the objective nature of your being, the raw fact of your existence. Separating them out like this really helps untangle our subjective experience of life from the philosophical reality of our existence. Okay, part 4, integrating human understanding and connecting this entire map together.
When you step back and look at this complete architecture, moving all the way from the collective question of who are we, down to the deepest individual question of what am I, something amazing happens. In one glance, you can see exactly how first-person subjective experience, second-person shared meaning, and third-person objective reality completely unite to form the whole picture.
And the real beauty of this framework, these aren't just isolated silos. They form a massive, integrative cycle. Think about it. Science requires epistemology to validate its methods. Epistemology presupposes a mind, which brings in phenomenology. That consciousness naturally leads to deep questions of ontology and existential values. And those values ultimately shape our collective civilization, which in turn builds the very universities that fund the scientific inquiry. It's like a giant puzzle where each project fundamentally depends on the others. Now, this is absolutely crucial. It's not just some abstract academic exercise. Look at the modern challenges we are facing today: artificial intelligence, ecological sustainability, political polarization. These crises cannot be solved by a single discipline. You can't solve climate change just with the objective science of carbon emissions. You also need the collective ethics of global cooperation and the existential wisdom of valuing future generations. We desperately need integration, not fragmentation. So I want to leave you with a provocative thought to reflect on today. When you look at this complete map of human inquiry, which of the 6 projects is missing from your own worldview? Look, we all have blind spots. Maybe you lean heavily into objective science but kind of ignore the existential stuff. Or maybe you focus entirely on collective politics but overlook your own phenomenology. But consciously exploring all 6 projects, we can seek out a much deeper, wiser, and far more integrated understanding of reality.